He is the co-founder and CEO of Interloom, tackling messy, unstructured enterprise workflows. Previously, he built and sold a knowledge graph company to Hyperscience, where he helped bring machine learning into large-scale back-office systems at organizations like Volkswagen. Now, he's betting on a shift. AI can finally handle complex operational work, and that is a vision backed by a recent $16.5 million raise from Air Street Capital, DN Capital, and Bek Ventures. What a group to be in the running with. Fabian, I know you're saying that what's massively underestimated is the complexity and the importance that domain experts play in the operationalization of AI enterprises globally. Tell us all about how Interloom captures this expert knowledge and creates the enterprise context and memory layer to power operations and AI agents with the knowledge they need to resolve work autonomously.
Yeah, perfect. First of all, thanks for having me. More than excited to talk about it. And maybe let's start with maybe untangling this a bit, because before we start with what we do, I think we should talk about the fact that it is massively underestimated, right? That's a claim. I think by now, maybe 2 years into the whole thing, I think the market maybe realized a little bit more that there's more to this entire revolution than just like, putting an agent on it and tell it, hey, process this claim or handle this escalation. And I think it comes a little bit from the fact that in general, technologists, and I include myself in it, we kind of tend to oversimplify a lot of things, which, by the way, is our job. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I have a great anecdote to that, where I went into the room of a global CIO of a logistics company. I'm not going to say names. And one day he was like, Fabian, you tech companies, you always come in here and tell me how much efficiencies I can win and whatever. There's still yet to come a day where I can let one person go because I've bought a software, right? Because in the end, when it comes to it, it's still people pushing parcels across, global supply chains and borders. And I think it really spoke to this fact that, we always look at the world from the lens of our computers and in many ways also Silicon Valley, or here in Europe from London or Munich. And think we can just make everything better. But the reality is the world is a very messy place, right? Things change all the time. Like if you just look at what happened to tariffs in recent months. And so having had the privilege to work for some very large enterprises for quite a while now, we have actually seen and understood that there's a massive problem with the fact that a lot of the work that is being done specifically in operations and the back office, that essentially, by the way, power global insurance, banking, logistics, most of the actual knowledge is not written down, right? It's just being done. Like people, that's why you call it a domain expert, and an expert is because they trained within even a specific company. I forget domains for 1 second, right? But like how exactly a company handles a claim or an underwriting decision actually is almost a USP of that company. And even in logistics, it's exactly the same. Like how exactly you do import exports and how fast you do it is your competitive advantage. So that literally lives within the heads of the experts and the way that they do it. And so far, by the way, there was no technology at all that could handle this complexity or just language and emails in the same way that we can.
And every single time we attempt to codify it, I think we've all been in companies that try and do that, and it becomes a massive mess. People end up not using it anyway. It's a bunch of point and click.
It's impossible. It's impossible to document everything. And it's quite naturally, it actually would be more work to document it than to just do it, right?
That's what it
But
feels
that
like.
is where AI shines. That's where AI is actually super good at, right? To summarize, to understand, to contextualize. Actually, way more, by the way, than reliably with a very high amount of accuracy, do a certain task. Because just the other day, one of our investors, he wrote me a message saying, "Oh, there's this new model that and Hyperscience was essentially an OCR replacement with machine learning, and our core competency was like accuracy." And he's like, "Oh, look at that! Are the document processors in trouble now?" And because there's this new model, which is like the best model on the planet, and it reported like a 70% accuracy. And like the problem with 70% or 80%, when we sometimes read this, we're like, "Oh, a genius." I'm like, okay, 70% accuracy, just to put this into perspective, on a 5-step task workflow, right? 5 steps. You have to calculate 70 times 70 times 70 times 70 times 70. That's already like at a level that no person would ever give that process agency. So I think the fundamental truth is that we're far away from a state where we could give it full autonomy. That doesn't mean that we can't outsource 80, 90% of all subtasks to agents. I fundamentally believe even at the current level of the technology and the performance of the models, and we all know how much better they got just even since November, right? We can already increase productivity in these workflows and these back office tasks by tenfold from my perspective. And so I don't even think that that discussion necessarily is so important. But the more important discussion is, well, if we've never written it down, how will the agent do anything? You know, and the truth is, I think it won't be able to. And that's why we actually started at the drawing board 2 years ago, and we said, okay, if it's true that most of the actual way that companies operate and work and all of these decisions are not really formally documented, because now everybody's crazy about SOPs, and I'm like, the SOPs don't really say the truth about what's happening. It's literally the gut feeling of the underwriter that actually makes the decision. Well, we started to say, okay, how do we build software that first learns? Right? A typical crawl, walk, run approach, you first got to crawl. And the crawling means let's learn how these companies actually function, how decisions are made. And that effectively means capturing, what has happened in order to then say, well, sure, if we always talk about AI and AGI and open-endedness, the truth is if you just give it a cheat sheet to say, well, there was a similar case where we solved it this way, the agent is fully capable to do 90% of that process on its own. But essentially, that is why also, when you ask the question of how do we solve that, right? We actually made a pretty controversial decision at the time to just build an entirely new platform and workspace. Because today, honestly, what are the tools that we use in these ops teams, right? I see a lot of misused Jira. So Jira, that was built for tech ticketing, is now used in logistics companies to actually solve escalations. Doesn't do anything for you besides collate the email in, and is 95% of the features you don't need, and the things that I think you actually will need now isn't provided. Or you just do it out of email inboxes and spreadsheets. And if we just want to do anything about specifically those repetitive workflows in terms of like outsourcing work to agents that will bring the automation, we got to start with building a workspace that actually, people can just naturally work into and collaborate with the agents and themselves. But the system underneath is built to actually just trace and capture every single action that happens to make sure that we remember how we did it last time. And that's essentially the approach that we took. And it does mean you are going to work into a new ticketing system, so to speak, but it's a ticketing system that learns from every case because it just remembers every single action and every single thing between agents and these experts in one place. And that's kind of the USP that we now bring to the table.
Yeah, so tell me, just to make that super abundantly clear to everyone, what you've built is a workspace kind of like Jira, so to say, but it's foundationally built with AI. It's built for that use case, so to say, of being able to actually layer on AI. Whereas if you're bolting it onto a software that you're already using, that's already built in one way, you're not going to get to anything as smooth as something like Interloom.
I mean, and I have a good analogy that we usually also use with customers that explains this. So until very recently, right? I think it was Alan Turing. It was either just a movie or it was actually Alan Turing, but I know the quote is from somewhat associated with him, is that computers and humans both think, right? They just think very differently. And a computer thinks very structured, and a human obviously thinks very unstructured and communicates very unstructured. And so far, we had no technology to transition this. I still think you can boil down AI to the simplicity of computers understand language, right? And that has an insane amount of unlock in terms of what we can subtly do. And the problem with software so far was because software was so deterministic and structured, you had to predefine everything. Like rules engines, for example. And we've all in some, you said it before, right? We've all in some form or shape, whether or not startup or large enterprise, fought against the rules engine that we predefine, and then we realize, oh, but something changes, or oh, we forgot something. And it's like we estimate that I think you can only kind of code or predefine like 30% of the workflows at an enterprise. I think 70% is, because otherwise, why are there still 100,000 people at these enterprises? If we could predefine everything, you could just say, well, automate it. So the problem is the rigidness of it, right? All of the systems, I'm not even saying Jira is a bad system. I think I'm just saying it's being used in a lot of use cases it was never intended to. But even now, and that's true for virtually any software, you will have that split between either you do it 100% manual, which I think is over. Everybody will use agents, I think, down the line. You have this agentic thing, which is essentially like an in between, right? Way more flexible, not 100% accurate, but like, you know, acts more like humans, which is agents. And then you have still deterministic software, because don't get me wrong, if you can predefine it. It's cheaper, it's more accurate, and it's safer. So I think Andre Karpathy said the other day in one of his great podcasts, like, you gotta need a slider of exactly that, right? How much human in the loop do I need? How much agent can I allow for? And how much deterministic code can I actually enable? Also with coding agents now making it much easier on the integration layer side and the tool side to do that. So that's kind of the problem we're trying to address, is that it needs to be adaptive. That means it needs to be able to be very, very quickly adjustable towards the task at hand. And that's literally what software was never built for. So now you can put an agent on top of your very rigid system that's not going to make it dynamic. And the best analogy that I said I'll speak to is, there is a software that we all use every day that changed our planet more than almost anything else I've ever seen, and that works exactly the way that I see the future of orchestration of agents and experts and within workflows happen, and that's Google Maps. So Google Maps, if you think about it, right, there's maps underneath. So there is a deterministically encoded thing, right? It's updated once in a while when the street, like, but that's not what Google Maps does. Like, there were maps before that, and the first navigation systems, for that matter, they actually were just like the maps, and you had the point on it. But then you also, I don't know if you still remember, I'm old enough, I'm 38, but you sometimes drove over a street that wasn't on the map yet, so you were driving through no man's land. But the truth is, today's navigation systems, they are actually fed by people driving. Right? So you could take the maps away, Google would still be able to completely navigate everyone, because there's so many people that are using it in a real-time feedback loop, that even the way that they predict and forecast traffic, right, is so accurate because so many people are driving. So Google, nobody there sits there and like says, oh, this road is blocked. No, quite the opposite. They just realize that people stop driving on it. And then they essentially reinforce that and say, well, if nobody's driving on it, it must be blocked. The same way with the traffic jam. And the interesting part about the symbiosis is, because there's an interesting question to it, is like, who is actually navigating whom? You take one side away, the system doesn't work anymore. If the people would stop sending the signal of where they're driving, Google Maps can't forecast the traffic, right? So the people are actually telling Google what the current source of truth is. They're like the evaluators of the recommendation. But the system constantly recommends people. So there is, you know, just like a beautiful adaptiveness to the way that this works. And if you think how the way that I think about agents, experts, and software to work together is exactly the same way, right? So something comes in, we have no idea what it is. A new escalation at a harbor, a new parcel comes in, you have no idea how to declare it, you don't even have the customs codes, a lot of paperwork missing. An expert will have to take care of it. No agent in the world is going to be able to solve that one, right? You got to call the customer, you got to interact. Well, it can be prepared by agents, don't get me wrong. There is a productivity in agents on its own, but if you want to think about throughput and automation rates, you gotta essentially be able to do the end-to-end. And so the way that it works is, well, now I have to come in as an expert. I lead the way. I show how it's done. I use the human capability, which is so good, to like pioneer the work. Well, okay, then once I've done that and I've resolved that, something similar happens again. Well, you know, now it happened the second time. What we do is we just cluster the precedents. So we find the one which is now only possible because embeddings got so good and agents got so good. We can find the ones that are similar somewhat from a problem perspective and say, well, at least the agent now has the context using our context graph to say, well, that was the one that we already solved. Now I have a plan. It doesn't need to be 100% the same one, because I would not automate this. I would bring in the expert and say, well, you know, that's what you did last time. Do you want me to execute on this again? And then though, if this happens a lot and there's like the 15th time or the 17th time, the same thing, it's very much the same problem, well, then you might want to add the autonomy slider towards the agent. And at some point you're like, well, if it's always the same, why don't you just like, you know, use cursor and codex and it just build me a deterministic workflow for it, until something happens that changes the demand, where the process changes again. Well, you're going to default back to the human. So none of what I just described exists today. Like we do it with system integrators like Accenture and consulting companies and platforms like ServiceNow and Jira and SAP. And I'm not saying that needs to go away. I'm just saying there's such a long tail of complexity in these companies that having a system that does this at 10x the speed and 10x the iteration and 10x less the cost to what it used to cost, I think is a great vision, and that's really what we are going for.
One final question before we close here. I want to ask you, in a world where we have OpenAI and Anthropic and Google all investing massively at scale, we can all see the path for them to go after almost any space that we're touching. Why do you think there's room for Interloom? Why are you not afraid that they're moving in on your territory?
Well, I mean, first of all, great question. I think, first of all, they all will in some shape or form. I think they've even announced it. OpenAI just said, well, we're going to stop all side projects, whatever that means, and just go for business users in some way. And we see it with Claude Cowork, Anthropic and Claude Cowork all the time. But I still think there is, yet again, there is this half prosumer kind of like Teams thing, right? And I'm not saying they're not going to be successful. They will be successful, just like from the get-go, last year, we had to justify ourselves against Copilot. This year, we have to go against Cowork. I think people just underestimate still how complex an organization is, right? There is so many layers of things that we need to build for this to work, including version control, an org chart where you have like the complexity of how an agent even is scoped towards the permissions it has. Like we need to think this through, right? We're not just gonna have one agent that has access to the entire SAP instance and then everybody gets to use it. And the reason why we have all of these tools that essentially governed how we built companies for 400 years, I don't think they're gonna disappear. I think we're gonna have to adapt towards how organizations function. And I read another blog post yesterday, actually by Andreessen Horowitz, I think it was by George, the partner there, or Seema, where they also said like the actual challenge isn't even technical, it's an organizational challenge, right? And you see that a little bit by Anthropic and Claude and everybody now partnering with Accenture and the Big Four and all of the others. The only challenge to that, and again, for the core processes, these all make sense, but the only challenge to that is like, and that's also, I think our biggest competition is everything stays the same. We're still paying hundreds of euros for user licenses to manually work into forms. We're on top of that going to pay all of the tokens necessary for all of these agents to do work. On top of that, we're going to pay the system integrators, and essentially, and we have to do this in the same iteration loops. Okay, now powered by Cursor or something like that, but like and Claude Code. I don't think that's not Google Maps, right? That's not what a navigation system does. That's essentially just saying, well, you're still navigating with paper maps, you're just doing it with a digital map. So the first iteration. I think if we actually want to, make the world and specifically software more dynamic and adaptable towards the process of each and every company on the planet, I think you need a very opinionated approach. And that's also why we are also building on those large models, but on the application layer, it's not a model, like it's not one winner takes it all. And it's been always the same argument to say, is Google gonna take the whole pie? I'm actually most excited about all the new use cases that nobody ever thought about. Because what I see a lot right now is people try to automate processes that we have already automated for 15 years with companies like UiPath that Bek was the OG investor in. And I think rather, like when I go to a large customer that we work with, like Zurich or Volkswagen, it's way more about finding use cases that were never feasible before. They didn't have an ROI. If you gotta get the Big Four involved, like it's over because it's too small for that. But it's way big enough for something that adapts dynamically and just adjusts to the experts just doing it manually, identifying what we can outsource to the agents and use that slider of autonomy to say, when we can trust the system, when we need to fall back. And that's what Interloom and our workspace and the orchestration engine is all about. It's just capturing that expert memory, grounding the agents in it, and providing a secure environment to govern those workflows. That's what we do.
Yeah, I imagine that things like OpenClaw is such a great showcase of what's happening and how everything's becoming possible. But everyone who runs a business can also see, okay, this is maybe not for me just quite yet. But people like you are going to make it for all the enterprises as well as small businesses. Fabian, thank you so much for joining me today. I just want to ask you one final thing before we close. What should we say to the audience that are tuning in? I'm sure we have a bunch of larger corporates that I think would be interested in what you're doing.
So I think the most important message here is like go to our website, interloom.com, click the demo button. We're happy to showcase what we already do for others. But I think the most important message is it's gonna be, we're gonna learn from the customers as much as they do from us, right? It's not like the first generation of software where you predefine everything, as I said, and then you built it, but rather it's in the speed of iteration is what I'm personally interested in. So I'm looking for partners and customers that want to get their hands dirty, want to deploy it in a obviously secure environment, and we provide that, but at the same time, actually work on real data and real problems, because I think the technology is there. We got to learn how to bring it into the back offices and bring it into the operations in order to really get the value out. And that's literally what I would say, and invite everyone into is just like join us and join this journey. And I think we can do a lot of great things as a market over the next few years.
Absolutely. Fabian, where are you building out of? Because you've got Air Street Capital, DN Capital, and Bek Ventures. They're all over Europe, all of them. So where are you building? Where should people co-founders, so to say, I was about to say early joiners, operators that want to join someone like you?
So we're spread out across Amsterdam, Berlin, Munich, and London. We'll also support anything remote within that area for the team, because we want to get the best people in to solve and crack this problem. So very much Central Europe. Half of the team is from the US. So we obviously are building this for global markets. So, and with that, like any of those hubs is second.
Any specific profiles that are more important than others?
Right now, we're actually looking a lot, as I think the whole market is, for really forward engineers, whatever that means, right? But anyone who is either extremely technical, like very, very top-notch coding, and is excited about trying to redesign how we even do that for workflow automation specifically, but also people that are just extremely excited to bridge the gap between operations teams and software development, because I think we can unlock and empower operations people to do most of this on their own, right, where the expertise sits. So if you're an operator, we're also always excited to talk. So please just, shoot us a mail.
Fabian, thank you so much for building so hardcore together with the rest of the European founder community. And